Hey friends, what is up and welcome back to my channel. As you guys can tell from the title of today's video, we're going to be doing my April wrap up. I actually read this month. I am so shocked. A few of these, actually I think 3 or 4 of them I read in a weekend. So a lot of my reading primarily was done at the end of the month, and it was my last week of my 2-week vacation from work. We basically were told to stay home with pay for 2 weeks just to try to combat everything that is happening, and I didn't end up reading till the last weekend that we had, but I did want to sit down and talk to you guys about the books that I did read because I loved most of them. The first one that I read would be Catching Fire, which is the second book in the Hunger Games trilogy, or what was a trilogy, but she's actually doing a prequel, which is why I ended up starting this series. My friend Bunny, who you guys know I absolutely love, and then Bex as well, we decided to buddy read the entire series together in anticipation for the new one because everybody was on Twitter, talking about it. Some people were really excited, some people weren't, and I have never read the series, and they started a buddy read of it. And Bunny and I had been talking about doing a buddy read of the series together for a while, so they asked me if I wanted to join them. And like I said, this is the second book in the series, so I won't get into too much of what happens because I feel like, in a way, it can kind of ruin the first one. It is a well-loved older series, so I will talk about a few things, but essentially, Katniss is once again thrown into the Hunger Games, and that is what this follows. If you've seen the movies, if you read the book, obviously you know that that's what happens. I think it's pretty common knowledge, but I don't want to talk too much about the plot, but I will say, for me, the only thing that brought it down from a 4-star to a 5-star for me is a bit of the ending. And I can't really address that in a wrap-up because, like I said, if you haven't read it, if you are anticipating reading it, because I feel like the fact that there is a prequel coming out and that there was a lot of dialogue and discussion on it, I feel like more people are actually finally reading the series. But overall, I did enjoy it. Like I said, the ending was a bit much in the way that it's one of those endings where it really sets up the second book, but it waits until the last 5 pages. And the rest of the book is really just about the Hunger Games themselves. And I will say I found the actual Hunger Games this time a bit more mental. It was a lot of piecing together kind of what was happening within the Hunger Games themselves, which makes sense because the first one, you're supposed to really be focusing on the brutality of the entire thing. But in the second one, obviously, some of our people who are going back to the Hunger Games have actually already been there. So you know that they are able to survive, you know a bit about their fighting style and the things that they are able to do. So I appreciated that kind of the explanation of the Hunger Games, or what you're supposed to focus on for the Hunger Games, was different in this book, because if not, it would be akin to, just regurgitating the original one. Even if the Hunger Games are different every year, the overall feel would have been the same. So I appreciate that. As well as in the first one, when Katniss and Peeta are sent to the Hunger Games, you get to kind of follow them through the, I don't know if you want to call it interview process, but where they have to kind of show their strengths and capabilities to the game makers themselves. And that whole bit was really cut out, or definitely slimmed down a lot. Because the premise of this one is previous winners from the other Hunger Games are actually put back into the Hunger Games as, they're chosen, I was going to say elected, but they are chosen to go back, akin to how it was in the first one, where they were just drawn randomly. So I thought that was really cool. Definitely the reworking of it, I really enjoyed that. And this is a book that really kept me guessing most of the time, because there are certain characters that, characters are trying to work together, and in this one you're like, okay, well, are they actually trustworthy? Can we trust them? It was a lot of that throughout the story as well, which I thought took away from the overall, oh, it's the Hunger Games again, and added another level and depth to it. So I did enjoy it. But like I said, the only thing I didn't really enjoy was the ending, because it almost felt I don't know, a little too abrupt for me, I think. But I am excited to read the third one. I have heard that people's least favorite is Mockingjay. My best friend Rosie actually never even finished the series because she was super bored in Mockingjay, so we'll see what I think. But I know I'm going to read the prequel because I am pretty interested to see all of this, or even younger Snow's perspective. That is something that I am interested in. So far I am really liking the series. I'm 2 books out of the current 3 and possibly 4, so I think I'm doing really well, and so far it's holding up as a series that I'm really shocked that I ended up loving. Now the next book I read is a bit different for me. It is actually, I don't want to call it a self-help book, but it is more of a memoir, and it is Big Magic, and this is by Elizabeth Gilbert, who is the author who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And when I picked this up before my birthday in February, and I started listening to it on audiobook. Yes, I have the physical copy because they came in at basically the same time. But when I started reading it, I was really enjoying it. I mean, I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars, but basically what this book is about Elizabeth talking about how she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, basically, and harnessing your creativeness or your creativity and making it work for you, and how creativity is basically magic, and if you don't nurture it and take care of it, then it doesn't really work for you. And it's a lot about like focusing on your own shit as opposed to focusing on other people's. So I found a lot of really valuable resources in this. I would say when I finished the book, I had a really big desire to go home and create something, and to go home and really like put time and effort into my creativity as opposed to just assuming that it is going to happen for me. And she does address like creativity when it comes to people basically punishing themselves, or like the tortured artist kind of perspective, and then the perspective of just like you don't need to feel tortured about your art to want to create it. Like, because a lot of people, like she talks about in creative schools and stuff, they say if you're not tortured for your art, then basically your art doesn't matter, and how that doesn't realistically make sense, which I really appreciated, because as somebody who feels like I need to stay up all night to do something, or I need to get very little sleep to, you know, wake up early, like I need to make sure I'm, you know, staying up as late as possible brainstorming, or no matter how late I stayed up the night before, like I need to get up early to get everything done, and, you know, I need to be sporadically, like crazily trying to take on too much and like really suffering for my art. And, you know, this really opened my eyes to the fact that that doesn't need to be how it is. And I feel like that's something that we've kind of talked about in like the community a lot. So I really like that she definitely mirrored that in here. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 because it is more of a memoir. Like I said, she does talk about herself quite a bit in this, but it is used more so as like examples of things. But the issue that I had with some of it is that she was a little hokey at times, I guess is the best way you can say it. I mean, I wouldn't consider it, like when you say magic, I don't think she necessarily means like magic itself. But she definitely talks about like the feeling of it, and a lot of the time that did resonate with me, but sometimes it felt just kind of off. But I did enjoy it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. If you are a creative individual and you know, struggle with certain things, I think this is a good book to pick up. Now, the next book I have to talk about is a book that I gave 3 stars. I did stay up all night reading it, so I wouldn't say it was the most unenjoyable experience I've had, but it was not my favorite, and that would be Love, Unscripted by Owen Nichols. Now, this book follows Nick and Ellie. They meet on the night of Obama's presidential election, and they are living in the UK. Nick works for a theater, and he's a projectionist, basically, the person who kind of like splices film to show them, like the actual film reels that you guys see, which don't necessarily exist anymore. A lot of theaters, if not all of them, are primarily digital. And Ellie is a photographer, and it follows their relationship. The book actually starts out with Ellie leaving Nick, being like, I don't love you like you need me to love you, and I'm leaving. Now, the kind of weird thing about the book, and I think one of the things that people really struggled with, was the jumping back and forth. Now, I didn't really struggle with that, and I don't know if it's because I read it all in one sitting, and if you do read it over a period of time, it can get kind of confusing, but I do feel like the chapters are pretty obviously labeled on what is what, and it primarily jumps from present day to the night that they met. There are a few things in between with after they met, you know, after the presidential election. There are a couple of flashbacks in the time of their almost 5-year relationship, but primarily it is after the breakup and when they first met. So I did enjoy that. I find that books like that tend to drag me down, and I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I did actually enjoy that aspect of this book. I think it was cool to see how they've grown or not grown. The things that I didn't like about this book, I don't like Nick. I didn't like Nick at all. He's supposed to be a very realistic character. He's supposed to be somebody who's kind of stuck in his ways, doesn't really want to grow and change, which is the opposite of Ellie. Ellie wants good things for him. Another thing that I didn't like about this book is I didn't connect with the relationship, which is kind of sad, because the reason why I didn't connect with them is that they are the type of relationship where both want to help each other. They don't necessarily want to be the best versions of themselves to help each other. They just want to take care of and help. You hear a lot in the story about, you know, the fact that Ellie's taking a lot of lumps for Nick, like she's being held back by Nick, that Nick doesn't want to try to do other things. And he also speaks about how he's taking lumps for Ellie because Ellie wants to go off and try to like better herself, and Nick doesn't really understand why he needs to change. So I sort of get the very realistic aspect of things, but it didn't really sink in with me. I've also read other reviews that people say that they didn't really like the references in here, and I will say there are references, but there are far and few between for me, like for me to feel uncomfortable. But I will also say that I'm a fan of books that do have a lot of references to pop culture. And obviously, since that is the capacity that Nick works at, the type of job that he has, there are a few of them in the book, but I wouldn't say they are by any means overwhelming, but they are definitely there if you don't like things like that. But yeah, like I said, 3-star. It wasn't the worst book I've ever read, and it wasn't necessarily a book that I'm going to 100% go and like recommend to people. There is no sex or anything like that in the book. It is definitely just a romance novel. There isn't a whole lot of like, you know, romance in that kind of way. It is mostly just like a I love you, because obviously it is post breakup and they are talking about the night that they met, but nothing crazy chaotic happens that night either. So if you're looking for a straight romance novel with no smut in it, this is a good one, I think, to choose for that. But like I said, just be aware of some of the caveats that I have for why I did and didn't like it. The next book that I have here is a book that I also gave 3 stars because, once again, it was an enjoyable read, but for some reason it was taking me a while to actually sit down and finish the book. And that would be The Best Laid Plans. I was actually sent this by Penguin Teen, and like I said, I did enjoy it, but I wasn't absolutely head over heels in love with it. So their main character, Keely, she's a senior, and it is her, obviously, last year of high school, and all of her friends around her have lost their virginity. So that's sort of like the basis of the book. She wants to become one of those people that has lost their virginity, which to me, I thought was a bit of a weird kind of plot line for this. And I will say this is a YA novel, so I found it even slightly more alarming, but I have a lot of thoughts on this book because I am torn between a few things. I think overall the plot was interesting, not necessarily one that I thought I would see in a YA novel, but not the worst. There is a little bit of heavy petting in this, but there's definitely no sex, no like real sex like you would see in adult novels, but it is obviously hinted at. I wouldn't say it's fade to black because nothing ever necessarily gets to that point in the novel. But Keely, at one point in time, on the recommendation of her friend Hannah, decides to ask her best friend Andrew to have sex with her because Andrew is a playboy and knows what he's doing. And the reason why that is a big deal is because Keely is actually interested in a boy named James Dean. Yes, let that sink in for a second. A boy named James Dean, who she works with at a like video store. And the reason why that's a bit odd, and you can kind of tell what is happening in the story, is Andrew obviously has feelings for her. It's pretty obvious, at least for me. I kind of guessed that that's what was kind of going on. So when she asked him to do that, he feels very like pushed aside and, you know, like really, I don't know, hurt about it, which makes sense. Issues that I had with this book is I feel like it, despite the content that it has, was written for a younger audience because it's very obvious what's going on with Andrew. The book was really predictable for me and I didn't really like that. As well as James Dean. James Dean is an absolute fucking skis ball, and Keely continues to put herself in those situations. And she has these best friends that she, you know, has known her entire life, but none of them truly know what's going on with him. So I thought that was a bit odd. He is older. He is a college student. And while all the characters who are engaging in anything sexual are over the age of 18, like normally that wouldn't really bug me. That's not like something that I necessarily need in a book. But because of the fact that like the whole plot is about Keely prepping herself to be deflowered by this random guy that she met at the movie store, it's a bit weird. There are a couple of lines that I think are blurred a little bit, and I'm not the person to give dialogue or discussion on that, but there are times when Keely is underage drinking with James Dean, and there are circumstances that happen that really made me uncomfortable. Him being pretty forceful, her kind of being coerced into doing certain things, you know, just the overall disrespect of like trying to sleep with your best friend. There are a few things that I think could be addressed in this, and like I said, I'm not the person for that. I don't feel comfortable having that Discord, but a couple things did sit with me really awkwardly. I would recommend going on Goodreads. There are a ton of reviews on there where people cover it way better than I can. But overall, like I said, 3-star, not the worst book I've read, but the bad feelings that I got from certain parts of this are why I ended up giving it a 3-star instead of a 4-star. And I don't like Keely at all. The only characters that I really, really like in this are Andrew and Hannah. There's another character named Danielle who is just the rudest person in the entire book, and she's supposed to be this badass, but her and Keely tolerate each other but actually hate each other, and it's like a lot of like girl hate stuff throughout the book, and it's never really, it's not used as a lesson, it's just used as a girls are bitches to each other kind of way, and I didn't like that either. So there are a few things that I didn't like about it. I guess I could put it down to 2-star instead of 3, but I didn't absolutely hate it despite all that, which is kind of shocking because I feel like I should have just like not liked this at all. So if you're interested in reading it, like I said, go on Goodreads, read some of the reviews because there are quite a few negative things that do happen in here. The next book I read, I will put a picture on the screen, is the Backstages Volume 4, and this is odd, but it is a continuation of the story slightly, but primarily these are stories that were drawn and explained based around different holidays that do happen within the comic book. So it is not really like a story based, like I can really tell you what it's about, but it does follow like Valentine's Day and Halloween and a couple of other holidays that happen. Some new artists come in to work on the comic, so I did appreciate that, but for me as like number 4, I felt like it was really lacking in some things. Like I didn't really get more of the story like I wanted to. I did get a lot of my boys, which really makes me happy, and a couple of characters from the all-girls school are also involved in the book as well, which is something else that I really enjoy. But overall it wasn't like the most mind-blowing, but it was good. It is still the Backstagers, still a cast and crew that I absolutely love, so that was enjoyable nonetheless. But it is a comic book, so it wasn't like the longest read I've ever had. I read it like in, you know, half an hour or something like that, but it was still enjoyable, and I do still recommend this series to people. The next book that I read, I'm not going to linger here for too long, is HalfBlood Prince. I have been listening to this on audiobook. I gave it 5 stars, but basically this book, if you're not familiar with Harry Potter, is the HalfBlood Prince, the book where Harry actually finds the potion book that has all of the Half-Blood Prince's potions in it, and it is the book where he is supposed to be getting the memory of how the Horcruxes were made from Slughorn. That's like the basis of the book. I really liked it. Obviously, I've read these before. This is an audiobook reread of mine. I listen to them basically every night that I go to bed. Don't have much to say about this one. I am on the last book finally. I'm a little over 25% of the way through, and then I will be done with my reread of the entire series, but still very enjoyable. There are still parts of this book that make me absolutely heartbroken. I don't think I'll ever get over that, but still a good read. I still think the Harry Potter books hold up no matter what age that I am. Now, the last book that I read and my most favorite read of the month. Definitely, I would say one of the most favorite reads that I've had in a while, and that would be Undercover Bromance, which is the sequel or a continuation, because I saw yesterday that there's going to be a 3rd one and it's coming out this year. Hopefully, fingers crossed, COVID doesn't screw that up. But Undercover Bromance follows Liz, who is the sister of the main character from the first one, and then Brayden, who is, or Mac, who is one of the guys in the book club, the bromance book club. And this one is a bit different, and I actually think that I may like this one more than the first one because I love the characters so much more. And I will say, and I wrote this in my Goodreads review, there are no men better than the men in the bromance book club. This book addressed a lot of things, and a lot of things that I think were really important, and they didn't feel forced at all despite the kind of content that it is. Plot of this book is that Liz works at a restaurant. If you guys have read the first one, you will know that she is like a pastry chef. She works with her friend that owns like a cupcake restaurant, the bakery, and she works at this restaurant. And one night, Brayden actually comes in with a girl that he is seeing, and Liz basically dumps a $1,000 cupcake on his date's lap. And when that happens, there's actually a man who runs the restaurant, like the owner of the restaurant, and he turns out to be a literal piece of garbage because he is sexually harassing, assaulting the women who work for him, and he is paying them off. Well, Brayden gets wrapped into actually helping her try to take him down, and you can kind of feel like the sexual tension between the two of them. But the thing that I really like about this is Brayden is a playboy, and he doesn't really, I would say, necessarily understand that, and that is because he has a past that he is trying to hide, so he can never be 100% vulnerable with anyone. And you get to experience that firsthand with him, like you get to hear the internal dialogue, and I loved that. And then with Liz is definitely a hard ass. Liz has similar, I would say, hang-ups because of how her father was, and that's also addressed in the first book in Bromance Book Club. But you get to watch them kind of leap those hurdles together and figure things out. And this is a romance novel, obviously all is well that ends well in this, but it was fun to read. I was giggling out loud. Like, the men from the Bromance Book Club are so fucking funny. Like, everyone in this book is hilarious. Like, even Liz, there's certain parts that happen that, like, you just can't help but actually laugh out loud. So if you've been considering reading these books, I 100% would recommend them. I think that they are delightful. Just be wary that there is sex in here, and in the first one, if you're kind of iffy about that, it's pretty graphic, I would say. It is a book, so it's easy to like imagine what's happening. So if you're a little bit hinky about that, you might want to avoid them, but I think they're fun. I think the characters are great. And the thing that I really liked about this one is they do address the fact that Brayden, or the Mac, was friends with, or like in the same inner circles as the man who is doing the, you know, blackmailing and the assault on some of the other people. So it does get down to the men starting to have the dialogue of calling other men out on their shitty behavior. And there's actually an older man in this book who feels like, you know, he says, I wasn't okay with stuff like that. I've never been okay with stuff like that. I don't need to call it out. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And they address that in here too. So there's a lot of perspectives, and I think that was one thing that wasn't done really heavy-handedly, because this book is written by a woman. It's written by a woman about men who are calling other men out on their shit, but I think it was done in an amazing way. And I feel like even men reading this, if they're into romance like the guys in the Bromance Book Club are, will appreciate that. So 5 stars, favorite read of the month. I absolutely, like, favorite read for the longest time. Like my reading has been kind of and this definitely made me like fall in love with reading again. Alright guys, so those are the books that I read in the month of April. Let me know down below the last book you read or a book on your TBR that you want to get to in the month of May. We're going into May. Oh my god, but I love you guys so much. Thank you for watching and I will see you in my next video. Tremble and fear all enemies. Claim the stars property of Spensa Nightshade. Spensa Spin Nightshade. This is what it looks like. It's like a, I don't know, it's really soft. I wanted to say like, what's the, I can't remember the name of the type of bag that I thought this was going to be, but it's actually a lot softer than I thought it would be. I do also like the small print on it. It's not too big, like it's